Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, ready and raring to go.
That's right.
But there's some good news, but some news that a little bit disturbing. I don't know if you know about it, but the Iraq War probably is not over yet.
No.
It's been ongoing. I think there was a hint that it was going to happen right after 9/11, but it seemed like there was not complete acceptance of going to the war. The American people didn't want it, and we lived through all the propaganda for over a year, and finally they got there in 2003. We still have troops there,
Yep.
We have troops there. And it looks like there's still a little bit of fussing and fuming over there because, Kurdistan and the Kurds in the region, they're still an ally with the United States, but there's been some bombing going on in this territory. And it happens that Israel more or less admits that they have done it, and Iraq says that Israel's done it. But it also came from the part of Syria, I guess, where the Kurds are and where their allies, and it looks like some drones took off there. That's at least one of the major theories now. So in a way, the U.S. and Israel were working together, going back in. And here, I thought we paid a high price to turn that country into a democracy and peace and prosperity. And here it is, very much involved. It's just too bad that we think intervention is going to solve all the problem. Now, I think this is ongoing. It's related to our presence there. I wouldn't call this blowback, but I would call that long-term unintended consequences. But that, you could say, was after World War I, there was a long time unintended consequences when the West redrew all the lines. So this is ongoing, and there's now more concern. I mean, when you fit this into what's been happening to America's position as well as the Saudi position, it's not good. The bombing of the oil factories in Saudi Arabia, and then the Saudis being routed by the Houthis, and now once again, there's more of this going on, and this is not friendly toward the Saudis, and it's a challenge for the United States because sometimes our hands get tied. We're there, we want to be there, we want to be, the kingmaker. We don't want to get our hands dirty, and all of a sudden, the chaos is building. I think there's a sense that chaos is building over there, and it may get much worse. For the moment, though, there are no land troops there, and those who are thinking that we have to fight drone warfare seems to be more appealing than marching in there with troops. Yeah,
and the Israelis, they're constantly claiming we're under threat, we're under threat, we're under threat, help us, we're under threat, whereas in reality, they're the ones that are attacking all their neighbors. They hit Syria, they said 200 times. They've bragged about attacking Syria 200 times. And now recently there have been this spate of mystery attacks in Iraq over and over. Who's hitting Iraq? Who's bombing Iraq? What's going on here? Well, of course, the U.S. knows because the U.S. controls the airspace. They know what's going on there. And finally, as you point out, yesterday, a high-ranking Iraqi official finally came out and said it. Hey, it's the Israelis that are doing it. They keep bombing us. They've done it, I think, about a dozen times. They've killed and wounded dozens of people in Iraqis, with certainly the implicit, at least, okay from the U.S. And the issue here is what are known as the popular mobilization forces. And these are Iraqis, despite what the Israelis and the U.S. say. These are Iraqis, but they're Shia, and they're close to Iran. They have good relations with Iran. Of course, this is all the product of our intervention in Iraq, which brought Iraq and Iran together closely, so it's a direct product of it. But these are popular forces, and as Patrick Coburn points out in The Independent, in a piece we both read this morning, this group called Hashd al-Shabi is Iran influenced, but they're also a political and a military organization in Iraq with deep popular support. So it's not like there's these little outposts here and there that the Israelis are going to bomb, then it's all going to go away. It's not that at all. This is a deeply embedded part of current Iraqi political and military life. And it's really the can of worms that was opened in 2003. Thanks, neocons.
Well, I think we, the United States and our administration, along with Israel, are under a lot of pressure to do something about this and not let this happen like in Yemen now, in Saudi Arabia, where the appearance is that those people who are sympathetic and talk with and collaborate with, probably with Iran, they seem to have the upper hand, and yet the solution is not very easy. So I think that's the great danger that fits it. It's going to escalate, but you've already mentioned it. Where would we be if the United States had not gone in there and decided, to manage the affairs? And that always seems to be the problem. But this one, I think most people knew there were some bombings going on, and there were some accusation. But it was this weekend where it was sort of confirmed. But already there's enough sentiment in the Iraqi parliament to pass resolutions that saying the Americans ought to leave. See, they don't want us there.
Good for them.
Do they need us to protect them? They have enough problems internally finding out who's on whose side, But they want our troops out of there, and but we never really leave. I mean, what are we going to do? Are we going to move the base? You want to transfer the base to Texas or something?
Eventually.
Yeah. So,
this is the deep hypocrisy of the U.S. You remember the line better than anyone. We've got to give the Iraqi people their democracy back. We've got to give them back their country. They got to own their country again. Well, we did that, and guess what happened? The natural occurrence happened. There's a majority Shia in Iraq, and this party that I referred to, popularly known as the Popular Mobilization Forces, their political wing did well in the elections in 2018. They did pretty well. They have a lot of support. So here we go. We gave them their country back. They did well in their elections. We let the Israelis bomb them. So it's all about democracy. Yeah, I don't think so.
But it isn't really giving it back. That's propaganda.
That's what it is, propaganda.
It's really we're taking it over because it was in limbo there with Saddam Hussein. He used to be part of it, but then he got too independent, didn't like our dollar and a few other things. So it was taking it back and solidifying the support of the empire and incorporating that. And now people don't like us, But this fits my scenario, or at least my belief, is that the empire is shrinking, at least in image and ability and military strength. You pointed out just yesterday how weak the military comes across. They couldn't handle this. All the money spent, and the Houthis are able to do what they did and actually capture a lot of people. So this is I think, historic what's going on under today's circumstances, but it's not completely new. It really fits into the category that, boy, when you run into some people who like their homeland and they don't like strangers and people come in and tell them what to do, you don't lose. Afghanistan, probably the greatest example in all of history. Nobody conquers Afghanistan, but we didn't learn the lesson. We sort of messed up the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and we declared it the greatest victory ever. And yet we followed through, did the same thing again, and things aren't quite right yet there. We need to get out of Afghanistan and the rest of the places too.
As well. And I want to just go into a little bit more of what you brought up earlier, because as in Yemen, as in Syria, the Israelis, with U.S. backing, constantly claiming this is all about Iran. It's all about Iran. This is not, and they would say the same thing in Lebanon with the Hezbollah. The Houthis, it's all Iran. Syria, it's all Iran. It's all Iran in Lebanon. The fact of the matter is, it's not the case. And I just wonder now, they're betting on their allies. The Israelis are betting on their allies to backstop them. The U.S. has done that thus far. And they do have an alliance with the Saudi Arabia, basically an unwritten, but certainly an alliance against Iran. But that makes me wonder, what is the status of the Saudi-Israeli alliance? I mean, not with Iran, with Saudi Arabia. What is the status of the Saudi-Israeli alliance? We've talked about it a lot, this sea change, these drone attacks on Saudi oil facilities, and now the amazing routing of Saudi troops. And I just wonder if Israel, if they're smart, they're going to be a little bit nervous about this, about how, as you point out, if dedicated forces using unconventional warfare can rout the most expensively armed army probably in the world, it would make me wonder about the IDF. I mean, they do pretty well when they're up against unarmed Palestinian citizens, right? They can push them around pretty well. But when you're dealing with Iran is not hardly the Houthis. And with the other forces in the region, if I were the Israeli defense minister, I would step back and pause and think about really what are our capabilities in the region, how vulnerable we are.
You know, not too many people have made that point, and I think it's important because it's not something people will automatically accept, because the image is they have the best trained army ever, and they know how to provide for security. So that certainly deserves watching, and I guess in time we will find out. But so far, they have been able to avoid, marching with a lot of troops into a foreign country. But they have been using the bombs and going in, and they certainly intimidate and threaten the country of Iran. But that in itself isn't the solution, because Iran right now, I would think that there's a change in attitude, that they're not a third world nation when it comes to defending their interests. It looks like they've at least used strategies that have been better than what we have used. We're sort of going backwards, and it looks like Iran is defending itself, and that's been the whole problem. This whole thing that everything is Iran. Everything is Iran. It loses credibility, and to say it's never Iran is right, but to say it's all their fault. And of course, that would be just academic if we didn't have to defend the empire. And this is the reason that this is going to continue. And I'm afraid that we need to get our troops as far away as possible, because that's liable to explode.
You know, it should go without saying that countries pursue their own interests, right? And that's what Iran does in the region. And as you point out, it's not always and it's not never, but they do pursue their interests. We pursue our interests. Unfortunately, we pursue the interests of everyone else too, which is why it costs us $1 trillion a year. But it shouldn't be a surprise. But here's another thing I'd like to bring up, Dr. Paul, because I think it's also a wild card in this whole thing. And this is the reopening of a particular border crossing on the Iraqi-Syrian border. And I'm sure you read about it. This had been controlled by ISIS up until 2017. The Syrian army just took it over in 2017, and they've been trying to get it open since then. It's finally opened this last week. The Israelis are freaking out over it. The U.S. is upset about it. It's the land bridge from Iran to Lebanon is what they claim it is. It's why they're going to bomb it, and the Israelis bombed it as part of this spate of recent bombings too. But there are 800 trucks ready to cross this border. This is a kind of cross-border trade that Syria and Iraq has had for years now, that had been cut off by this war that's backed by the U.S. Now trade is coming. You know, Syria wants to rebuild. Most of it is rebuilding. And instead of, being a little bit happy that they're trying to rebuild, we're, winking and winking as the Israelis blow this place up.
You know, if the world wasn't made up of people who envy and look for power, and if they could avoid being paranoid, the principles that are so well known, that trade is what we should be promoting. And they're less likely to fight. But I don't think they have the basic interest. They want to continue the religious wars, and they're paranoid to no end, that no matter what, that we can't stand doing this. Even though you might describe a scenario, and it's probably existed in history way back, where these countries worked together and they went back and forth and they traded. There were lots of trades and cultural things that exchanged in that region. But now, the paranoia is so great. But I really put the blame back, all the way back to World War I, to have creating all these artificial countries and saying that if you don't do this, there's still a lot of artificial lines in there, and this won't be resolved by outsiders. It'll be resolved when the people are left alone. And we do know, and we've mentioned, there are times in history some of the countries did quite well with Christians and Jews and Muslims living together. It's not possible. But a lot of that dissent and anger among the religious group has gotten much worse in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, that's when some of this has broken down, even under Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
You know, there were a fair number of Christians there, which it's not, I don't know whether they're going back in now, but they had a short, problem with that too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, remember, we had Nassim Nicholas Taleb on the show, and he said strongly, because he knows the region like the back of his hand, he said if the U.S. had never gotten involved, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Arabs, they would have found a way, trade, all of these things, it would have been a lot more harmonious now, if we had just simply not gotten involved. But back, I want to just, one more thing about how the Israelis should be cautious now with the Saudis proven to be a paper tiger in terms of their army. We also know that Trump does not want a war with Iran. That's pretty clear. He's doing everything he can to avoid it. I think he understands the political fallout of it. So if I was the Israelis, I would also wonder how much the U.S. does have their back. Is it as much as they claim? They do well to pursue some talks, and I think there are some back channels between Israel and Iran, and that would be certainly the wisest thing, because they both have a lot in common, more than they might realize. But the whole thing just shows, and that's why we wanted to do the show, the idiocy of interventionism. This whole thing was created by the U.S. attack in 2003. Of course, there were antecedents, but essentially this was it. We want to get rid of Saddam without benefiting Iran. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. So I would say let the supporters of interventionism come on and defend their policy. Every place they've had a free hand, it's been an absolute disaster. We're still dealing with the disasters of 2002, 2003. It keeps getting worse. Now it's threatening a wider war. The answer, as Dr. Paul would say, I've been around him too long, the answer is to stop this interventionist foreign policy. We'd have a lot more peace and prosperity, right?
Right. Daniel, I want to follow up and close up with a statement about what you mentioned, that Trump doesn't want to have war with Iran. I think that's absolutely true. He doesn't. I think he said it. I think his sentiments are such, but he has a policy that does not exactly go along with his personal desires and his goals of having no war with Iran. And the one thing that I don't think he has learned, or he just flat out disagrees, that wars don't always start with just the first bomb. Sometimes war starts by intimidation and breaking down trade and putting on sanctions, putting on tariffs, and then using other people to do your dirty work for you. So a lot of that goes on. And as long as that is the case, if a person like Trump doesn't want to have the war, the only biggest thing that he would have to come to understand is that sanctions, intimidations, are acts of war. And if they did it to us, we'd be furious. And believe me, we wouldn't even be fighting in Washington, Republicans and Democrats. We would even come out of the closet, and admit they're friends because there's somebody else doing this to us. And that's what has to happen. We have to get people to realize what leads to the war. And of course, our principle that we talk about so much is the principle of interventionism. So yes, we become the kingpin. We have a very powerful central bank and dollar and military, and therefore we can throw our weight around and set the stage for antagonizing people. But this is why I think this is coming to an end. The antagonism is too great. The people don't want us there. They want to get rid of us. The dollar is not as strong as it used to be. It's down about 10% as a reserve currency, and I think that's going to continue. And some of these problems that we have faced here recently has been with something like Libya and Iraq. Didn't want to use our dollar. And of course, we won't even let the Iranians use the dollar. So it's all backwards. And it should be expected that we'd have these conflicts. But if we don't want war, and the American people don't want war, Trump doesn't want war, and there's only a few psychopaths in this country that want war, why listen to them that go along with these positions, which is setting the stage for war? It's not necessary, and that is why it's so important for us to get as many people as possible to realize that if you're a strong individual and have any character at all, you're going to stand up for non-intervention and not think of being a bully is the way to bring about peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.